Okay. The Founding Fathers gave birth to the United States of America. Starting with the 13 colonies, they shaped an union of states inside which every free man would be able to provide a decent living for his family and practice his own religion. Those founding fathers, and especially Thomas Jefferson, third president of the young republic, supported an agrarian society which relied on enslaved workforce. But how could the Constitution say that all men are created equal and in the same time condone slavery? The first to react were the Calvinists, for whom all men are God's children. They began to fight slavery through different means. First, pacific, like writing pamphlets and helping runaway slaves. Then more and more violent, like John Brown's bloody action in Kansas. Soon, the country was divided into two antagonistic entities, the Union and the Confederation. Abraham Lincoln was a main character in this terrible page of his country's history. He needed all his courage, his political intelligence, and his shrewdness to reunite the country. He finally succeeded, even though he paid the highest price. But the United States, as we know them, were reborn. Nobody could have predicted Abraham Lincoln's extraordinary destiny. He was born in a log cabin in a far-flung spot in Kentucky. Life was not easy, and every member of the family had to work in the farm. Young Abraham fiercely hated working in the fields. He preferred reading books, but his father, who was illiterate, despised education and wouldn't let him attend school. Young Lincoln was ferociously curious and eager to learn. He was very adventurous, and when he was 19, he worked on a boat who sailed down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. There, he was confronted with slavery, and that was a real shock for him. At the age of 21, he turned his back to his father's farm and went to New Salem. He knew for sure that he would never ever be a farmer and that he would never belong to a church. He rejected his father's faith and would always follow and trust his reason. In New Salem, he wanted to be part of the rise of the industrialization of the country, the premises of commerce, the beginning of the 19th century capitalism. His thirst for knowledge was so great that he studied the law by himself and became a lawyer. His real ambition was to be a driving force of the political field, and law provided him with an access to it. Even though he was tall and awkward and inelegant, the moment he opened his mouth, people would listen to him fascinated. He had always loved words and rhetoric, and he knew the power of speeches. He knew how to make people listen and follow him in his reasoning. He became a promising local political figure. After the death of his fiancée, he went to Springfield, state capital of Illinois, the only place where he would fulfill his ambition. In Springfield, he married Mary Ann Todd, a rich young woman from a well-acquainted family. That was his first step in the political world. He became a congressman in Illinois Assembly and began to be known on the national level. At that time, Kansas had just joined the Union. Fiery debates raged all over the country. Would it be a free state or slave state. Lincoln wrote articles about slavery. He considered slavery to hinder his desire of changing and modernizing the society. In 1868, during his campaign for the U.S. Senate, Lincoln made a speech that inflamed the nation. He compared the country to a house divided by slavery. A house divided against itself couldn't stand. It had to be all free or all slave. He won the Senate and was branded an abolitionist by his opponent Douglas. Stephen Douglas was a well-known politician who used the media to express his ideas. When Lincoln replied, both speeches were printed and widely read. Lincoln became more and more known and finally was chosen as a candidate for presidency. At that time, he was far from being abolitionist. Nevertheless, that's how he was perceived. In 1860, after a tough campaign, he succeeded and became the 16th President of the United States. The moment he was elected, 11 southern states seceded. The first one was South Carolina. Those states created a confederation of states. Lincoln was president of a fragmented nation, a nation that maybe wouldn't exist anymore. America was at war with itself. Lincoln desperately wanted the Union, and to achieve it, he needed a military victory over the Confederate Army led by General Lee. During the first years of the war, far from being overwhelmed by the Northern Army, the Southern Army was consistently victorious. The Northern generals were either incompetent or hesitant. Finally, Lincoln chose Ulysses Grant. Despite this new leadership in the army, the North was losing the war. Lincoln had to strike from within the Confederate States. He proclaimed the emancipation of the slaves in the Confederate States. He was careful not to include slaves belonging to the border states. By 1863, Grant's troops took control of the Mississippi River. It was a great victory, but on the other hand, the Confederate Army crossed the Potomac River and was threatening Pennsylvania. It had to be stopped. Both armies clashed at Gettysburg. It was a bloodshed on both sides. Men were killed by the thousands. Finally, the Union Army was victorious. It was the beginning of the end for the Southern Army. Gettysburg was turned into a memorial where hundreds and thousands of young men were buried. Lincoln made his famous speech in which he prayed that those men had not died in vain. After Gettysburg, the North took the advantage and step by step pushed the South to surrender. After the end of the war, Lincoln was reelected for a second term. In his last speech, he was considering giving citizenship to the slaves he had emancipated. That was too much for John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate supporter. During a play which Lincoln attended with his wife, he was shot dead by Booth. Abraham Lincoln left a broken country which has lost its sons, its wealth, its confidence in the future. More than that, this country had lost its belief in a God of love and compassion. What sin had they committed that God would allow such a slaughter. For Abraham Lincoln, this sin had been slavery.